Hi, friends. How are you? It's Andrew coming to you with another installment of, I guess, what we could call our story time. I recently posted a blog post entitled Your Life is Not a Limp. And I guess as I have begun to do, now I'm hopping on to share the spoken word, I guess, audiobook version of the post, which I'm really excited to share with you. I have two events coming up this month. Sunday, April 11th from 10 to 11 a.m. is the monthly group Sphere Healing. This one this month has a title or a theme. As I was putting it together yesterday, I got the very clear message to include the Christed heart as sort of the theme or the focus for this month's gathering. I'm not sure entirely what that means, but I get the sense we're going to be working with that 12th dimensional Christ consciousness frequency. Also probably focusing on the high heart chakra, which is around the thymus gland. It's between the heart center here and the throat. Some people call that the cosmic heart. Some people call that the high heart. Some people call that the Christed heart. Whatever words you use, suffice it to say, it feels like it's going to be some really beautiful, beautiful, powerful energy. So that one again is 10 to 11 a.m. on Sunday, the 11th. As always, you will get a recording of the event, even if you can't attend live. And then the following Sunday, the 18th, I'm doing another round of the energy field mapping. This tool is so next level. This is something that I have been using as a tool and as a practice for pretty much my entire life. And recently it became clear to me that this was an activation that we can create or bring online in other people if they're ready, willing, and interested, to really deepen the connection with self, to create this communication between the physical body and the energy body that really, really accelerates the experience of manifestation, really opens up new depths of self-healing available, opens up new levels of communication and connection with the self, with the entirety of the self. And it's just a really, really beautiful practice to add to your toolbox. So that is going to be, again, Sunday the 18th. That one's a little bit longer, from 10 a.m. to 12:30, so about 2.5 hours. We may use the entire time, we may not. But what I can tell you is last month's group that went through this workshop and through these activations are all having amazing, wonderful experiences. And it is just so exciting to be working at this level. So this workshop is a combination of energetic activations. We'll be doing some mudras and some very specific breathing sequences that actually activate the geometry within the field and bring this gift online. And then we're going to actually be getting into the creating and the drawing of some energy maps. So at the end of this 2.5 hour workshop, not only will you have the activations and the geometry resurrected in your field, you're also going to have a new way to connect with yourself, and you're going to walk away with some tangible stuff that you have created. So it's an awesome combination of like hands-on creative workshop, focused breathing and meditation, and energetic activation. So I would really, really love to see you for that one as well. I'm putting the links to both of those in the description so that you can check them out. And as always, you can sign up for my newsletter if you just want to get everything all in one shot, because I send that out monthly, at least once a month, sometimes more, with content, events, stuff that I'm sharing, stuff that I'm writing. So that's what I have for you today and this month. So on with the story time. This one, again, is entitled Your Life is Not a Limp. You can find this on my website, andrewmartin.energy, on the blog. I don't know, I said, choosing my words deliberately. I guess there's a bunch of stuff that I'm just now realizing no longer fits, I offered tentatively. Or maybe it never fit? I was doing my best to definitively describe what was currently going on in my experience, but it was coming off more like fuzzy questions rather than clear statements. I was currently in one of those phases that was stirring up deep, deep stuff, so this wasn't surprising. My journey had once again brought me to a place where words failed to aptly describe the enormity of what was present. Can you give me an example? He prompted. After almost 3 decades of friendship, he knew how to keep my often abstract trains of thought moving. Well, it's like all of these things that I've never stopped to question about myself are suddenly coming up for review. Like, he gently pressed. Like, because I was born in this body, on this date, on this planet, to this family, in this country, with the history of these experiences, that there are certain non-negotiable things that I just have to accept. I had found the thread of truth. I don't believe that anymore, I stated unequivocally. It's those old narratives that keep us locked in false identities. I refuse to make a claim that says there is anything in my experience that I cannot influence and recreate. Right? The excitement in his voice told me that he'd found the thread of truth too. You don't have to accept you were born with it, that's the way it is, and you just have to find a way to live with it. Find a way to live with it. Screw that. Your life is not a limp, he exclaimed. Your life is not a limp. It was like someone had flipped on the light in a dark room. Suddenly, I was aware that there was a huge part of my inner landscape that I had cordoned off and labeled things that are the way they are and will never change. Your life is not a limp. I could not get that phrase out of my head. Clearly, it had stirred something. It just hadn't floated up to the surface yet. I kept watching the thought as it fluttered by off and on over the next few weeks. Your life is not a limp. This wasn't necessarily new information. The truth that we are the creators of our own experience is a cornerstone of not only my personal belief system, but also the work I offer through my practice. Your life is not a limp. This was more than just a phrase that rang true. It was pointing me to something deeper. Something within my own experience was ready to be met with an open heart and loving curiosity. This was a big shift in perspective. Luckily, Osiris popped in to offer some context and deeper insight. Your field is the energy you are swimming in. Think of life like living in a snow globe. When the water is filled with thoughts and belief patterns that are untrue, in this context, untrue equals untrue for you, you are swimming in dirty water. The fact that a person is even aware that they are swimming in dirty water illustrates that they have begun to awaken. Many human lifetimes are lived without ever even wondering if there is another way to be. When you begin your journey of awakening, it is usually in response to an internal environment that is heavily polluted. When the awakening begins, often the primary aim is simply to learn how to still the water so the debris can settle. It is through this phase that one remembers how to breathe, how to feel, how to connect with the deeper layers of self. Through a myriad of processes, one eventually learns how to calm the waters, to settle the debris in order to see and feel clearly. This is a period where one remembers how to access inner peace and stillness by temporarily shutting out the external world. As the journey continues, one realizes that eventually they must emerge back into the world out there. During this emerging period, one begins to fight against their external environment. The mind begins to hunt for things out there that disturb the newly found inner peace. The limited self becomes fixated on eradicating anything that kicks up the debris. Many become rigid in their expectation that the outer world do nothing to upset them or cause internal discord. Rather than continuing to dig for the roots of the issue, they simply become content with managing the symptoms of living in the reality that they were born into. Many stay here and live their life, relying on coping mechanisms and monumental effort to control the world at large, never moving beyond this phase. Eventually, after years, lifetimes of trying to keep their debris settled and out of the way, many become exhausted with this conditional way of living. It is at this point that they become curious about how to eliminate the debris from their field altogether. This begins the journey of mastery. The desire to merge with oneself completely triggers the awakening of the connection with the eternal self and opens the true spiritual awakening. By choice or by chariot, this awakening will occur. It is only ever a matter of when. By choice or by chariot, here was another phrase that stuck with me. I asked for clarification on that nugget. By choice or by chariot is to say that regardless of whether you actively step forward and choose the awakening, or feel that the awakening chooses you like a chariot crashing into your reality, the awakening will at some point happen. Again, not new information, but Osiris really does possess a lovely turn of phrase. A few days later, I received an email from someone, I'll call her Jane, who I have worked with previously. Jane reached out asking if I could help her with some obsessive behaviors that were causing concern. After a bit of back and forth, she shared she had suffered prolonged sexual abuse as a child. She was sure this obsessive behavior was connected to the abuse. When we sat down to connect a few days later, it became clear that this was a real-world example of what I had been receiving around the lesson that your life is not a limp. Jane shared that she currently was seeing a therapist to help her with the obsessive behaviors. She is also really adept at working with her own inner landscape and layers of self that need healing. She has the language, the tools, the connection, and the understanding of what the trauma has created in her life. Her confusion was centered around the fact that it was still happening at all. There were no hidden corners that she was avoiding. Presumably, she knew everything one needed to know in order to untangle this issue. So why couldn't she unravel the obsessive behaviors? Not long after we began our work, the layer of self that was still holding on to the abuse came forward. She embodied the role of the survivor. She held the identity of the one who had been abused but had overcome. She illustrated many beautiful aspects of Jane's past that had been healed. She also shared that it was this very identity that kept the abuse program active. She shared that even the triumph of survival was rooted in the trauma. Without the history of abuse, there would be nothing to survive, she shared. To act in spite of, in defiance of, to triumph over, even to rebel in the face of something is still acting because of it. She shared the importance of this understanding. She didn't diminish the very real healing work that had been done to arrive at this point, nor was she dismissing the very real physical abuse that was at the root of this. What she was sharing was that even through all of the work to understand and release the trauma, the program of the trauma was still present. That's what the obsessive behaviors were about. They were the little inner child self trying to get the attention of the bigger outer human self to let her know she was still in there. She didn't want to be seen as the one who needed healing, or the one who needed love, or the one who had endured horrible, awful things. As well-intended as those perspectives are, they were still conditional. The journey of healing had inadvertently turned the abused inner child into something to be dealt with or managed. She understood the intention behind that perspective, but she was here to be accepted as she was. What she needed was to be accepted without condition. Not because of, not in spite of, not in defiance of. Full acceptance of her, abuse and all, was what she required. She is worthy because she is as she is. Regardless of what occurred in her history, that's what needed to be seen and accepted. Period. The only way she could integrate with Jane was by moving beyond the abuse completely, and that included the identity of the one who had survived. I was finally starting to get it. This is what Your Life is Not a Limp meant. Through the decades of inner work, Jane had accessed much within her. The work to heal the inner trauma was necessary. She had reached a place of deep understanding around her past. It had taken years of important work to get her to the place where she could stand and gaze lovingly into the eyes of herself and love her. The last remaining piece was simply to let go of the identity of the one who had been abused. It was no longer enough for Jane to know how to keep the debris in her snow globe from getting stirred up. She was ready to remove the cause of the debris altogether. Of course, as they often do, this client session pointed me squarely back to my own journey. Suddenly, there were a whole lot of new questions to live. Where in my life had I resigned myself to things that were well within my authority to change? What collective agreements were currently active in my system, running unchecked, that limited me more than they supported me? Why were there certain patterns of behavior and belief in my life that I had never stopped to question? I had experienced this in my own healing journey to a degree. The bullying I endured as a kid created very real wounds. Years ago, I realized that I'd actually healed those wounds. What I hadn't done was get up and leave the trauma party. Your Life is Not a Limp was bringing new perspective to my own life. Even though there was nobody in my immediate environment actively bullying me, the program was still active. My defenses were often on a hair trigger with no clear reason. I would find myself taking things personally that had nothing to do with me. I would experience pockets of anxiety that had no obvious cause. Caretaking, codependency, passive aggression. I was still playing the greatest hits of the trauma survivor behavior patterns, not because they were just part of being Andrew, but because I had not cleared the patterns of trauma from my field. I was still living in a snow globe filled with debris. Just because it wasn't actively stirred up or creating chaos in my field didn't mean it wasn't still there. Just because I had found the perfect place to store, categorize, and catalog the history of trauma didn't mean that it wasn't ready to be reactivated at the drop of a hat. Even though it had been decades since those experiences, it was in many ways still happening. The identity of the bullied outcast had just been reformatted into the formerly bullied outcast. At some point over those few weeks, realization smacked me across the face and it all became starkly clear. I don't have to live with my history like it's a physical condition to be endured. I didn't come into this life with the trauma. It's not an inextricable part of me. It's not an organ that's necessary for the function of life. So why do I still hang on to it? Why am I still showing up to claim that identity? Do I want to spend any more time aligning myself with history, or am I ready to draw a line in the sand? I mean, I don't identify myself as the one who ate that amazing meal in Paris 10 years ago, so why cherry pick the trauma for my history and wear that as a name tag? It's not me I am separating myself from here, because I am not my trauma. I am not my programs. I am not my skin. I am not my gender. I am not my name. I am not my family. I am not my age. I am not my sexual identity. I am not a demographic. I am not my programming. I could claim all of the above as my identity if I wanted to, and also, I don't have to claim any of it if I don't choose to. And neither do you. History may shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it? Bullshit, my dear. It is precisely because we don't fully reconcile, integrate, and release the history of our trauma that we repeat it. It really is up to you how you proceed from here. So here are some questions I use to point me towards not just healing, but liberating myself from my history. My hope is that these keys will inspire you too. Are there still areas or people in your life that make you feel like a child who has just been reprimanded? Are there still people in your life who hold up a version of you that simply isn't true anymore, but you find yourself falling back into old patterns around them anyway? Do you find yourself feeling ashamed, frightened, or guilty for no clear reason? Are there individuals who use their position of authority, perceived or actual, to successfully bully you into doing things their way? Are there people in your life who successfully emotionally blackmail you by saying, if you loved me, you would? While I can't be certain, I would venture a guess that a yes to any of those questions is pointing you towards some buried programming. I'm not saying that you don't have to take responsibility for your choices, nor am I saying you don't have to do the deep work necessary to heal. I'm also not telling you what to do. What I am saying is that your powers of creation and your authority as the sovereign creator of your life are yours whether you exercise them or not. What I am saying is that you don't have to agree to anything that is counter to who you know yourself to be. What I am saying is that your personal history is as dead and as irrelevant as you allow it to be. What I am saying is that it takes no more effort to create the life you dream of than it does to just let it happen by default. However, the former requires you showing up on purpose, deliberately, as clearly as you can in each and every moment. A life of freedom and liberation is 100% dependent on what you say yes or no to in each and every moment. Your life is not a limp. Just because that's the way it's been doesn't mean that that's the way it is. Any system built on truth liberates absolutely. If a system requires you to do, say, be, act, or live against yourself, then it is not built on truth. I love you.